I want to thank Mr. Mitchell for being on the air with us. He is the director of the Community Broadband Network Initiative, and he is with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which we are striving for here in our town. So, Mr. Mitchell, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. Excited to talk about broadband with you.
All right. Of course, we have Mediacom. You're up in Minnesota. And, of course, we have Mediacom with a stranglehold on us down here in Iowa, and we're here in our town. We're a town of about 26,000. We are trying to get our own broadband services. Smaller towns around us have got this done, but Mediacom, not surprisingly, is fighting us every step of the way. They don't really want to see that happen for obvious reasons. And, of course, Mediacom has sued a suburb in Des Moines over competition from Google. In other words, Mediacom will fight any competition whatsoever. Mediacom's position seems to be, we had a monopoly and we'd like to keep it.
And actually they sued a private company. Well, they sued the city, I think of Iowa City, when they were trying to work with another local company to bring in some competition. And that wasn't even the city building it themselves.
They sued they sued somebody for trying to go into competition with them?
Well, I think they argued that the way the city worked it out was some violation of the franchise law or something. But it's hard to tell with what this with how these laws are all written. The point is that Mediacom is very happy to sue anyone if it will even just delay competition for a year or two.
Yeah, sure, because that's more money for them, of course. And we made a serious mistake back in the 90s when we made Mediacom our franchise for cable television. I mean, for a long time, other cable companies couldn't even come into our state.
Yes, that's the long history. I mean, I'll say that there's pluses and minuses in that prior to 1992, when you could have exclusive cable franchises, one thing it did do is it required them to build out to everyone. And so towns in Iowa that have cable, at least mostly everyone should be served with that pretty mediocre service.
Yeah. Well, it got me again, Mr. Mitchell, here about 3 weeks ago. I had problems with my cable service one weekend. My internet was out, my TV was out, and but the internet came back, but my television didn't. So I set up an appointment, and of course this was on like a Sunday or Monday, and of course they couldn't get to my house till Thursday or Friday, and I had to wait 4 hours. They give you a 4-hour window where the guy might show up, where the tech might show up. So my window was from 8 to noon. And I don't know if I went to the bathroom or where I went, but the tech called at 11:46. I missed that call. I noticed it 9 minutes later and immediately called back. I was told I would have to sit there until 5 o'clock in the afternoon or schedule another 4-hour window, and I dropped Mediacom TV immediately. I don't care if I have to get an antenna back on my roof. I will never get Mediacom cable television again. That sort of arrogance, it really mean-spiritedness. I mean, you got a guy running around our little town here in a van with cable boxes in the back of his van, and he can't be bothered with my silly little problems. What other business, for God's sake? What kind of business model is this that they get away with this sort of thing, Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah, it's one in which they have very limited competition. And the thing is, if you talk to that guy, you'll probably find out that he has it worse than you do, right? Like he's probably being rushed, and he's probably getting docked pay if he doesn't clear up your problem in under an hour, which gives him the incentives of not necessarily doing the right work. I mean, this really comes from above. This isn't something where they have lazy workers. My guess is they have pretty good workers, and they put them to ridiculous standards as they try to just, pay as little as possible to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, I shouldn't forget that these sort of things do come from the top. And and so those at the top then, as far as I'm concerned, they need to answer. They need to answer to their customers for their poor treatment of their customers. And and by the way, let me say, in the past, I've had several Mediacom techs come to my house for other problems, and they've told me some of the situations with Mediacom, and it's in direct contrast with Mediacom's public statements at private public hearings here in town and on their website. So, I cannot trust a lot of what Mediacom says.
Yeah, I wouldn't even leave it to Mediacom. I know that you have experience with Mediacom, but right now we're looking at other big cable companies that are in a similar way. The federal government created this emergency broadband benefit to make it more affordable for people, particularly people who've been hard hit by the pandemic, to get connected to the internet to help them pay their bills. And we immediately saw some of these companies figuring out how to raise their prices and try to capture more of those government dollars. We don't see that from local providers around Iowa. The local providers, whether they're municipally owned or they're local private companies, they're trying to figure out how to service people. They're not in this to try and make a killing.
Yeah. Most cities like Fort Dodge and most little towns and cities like Fort Dodge across our state, the city people just didn't want to mess with it. They just, okay, well, let's bring a private company in there, and we did, because we're the city and we don't want to be responsible for it. If something goes wrong, we'll point a finger at Mediacom or Heritage Cable or whoever it was over the years and say, there's your problem. And I'm glad to see again that our town has moved again, trying to put together a broadband initiative. I have a feeling that they're trying to include Mediacom in any sort of partnership moving forward. But I would, because of the record of service of some of our cable companies, and you're right, it just isn't Mediacom. I've heard from people all over the state and in the Midwest that there are some of the other cable companies, even private cable companies in their areas, perform as if the customer doesn't matter at all. And we cannot allow ourselves to do that. I mean, even Amazon, you can take your product back to a Kohl's store if it's not something that you want or you decide it's something you want, but you can't do that with these people. You just can't.
And there's ample evidence that we can do better. I'm up here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Next door we have Minneapolis, has this local company doing a great job building out. This guy who's particularly both geeky and good at the technology. Amazing customer service reviews. You look at the utilities that have been in this, whether it's Cedar Falls or you look at Longmont in Colorado, they have like 91% extremely satisfied ratings. Not just like satisfied, but like overwhelmingly extremely satisfied. This is not an industry that we have to have people miserable to interact with.
Why is that? Why is there? Competition will bring out better service. That's what we need. Why is it so much better in Longmont, Colorado? Why is it locally owned completely or not?
Yes, yeah, much like Cedar Falls, they built their own network and they run it through a municipal electric utility that also provides electricity, some other services to the town. So they have full control over it. And, they charge a fair rate and they employ people to make sure those problems are solved quickly. And they just have the incentives that are right. A company like Mediacom, its incentives are to make sure that Wall Street is happy. And that means disinvesting in the network. If you can put off an investment until next year, you want to do that. If you can offshore, your customer service stuff, you want to do that. Everything is just about what can save money in the short term. And you just don't even care about whether the network could fall apart in the long term.
Well, they can do that because they're not worried. They can have, and I've had, all of us have had situations with offshore telemarketers, those sorts of things. What? Yeah, I don't understand this at all. As some of the smaller towns in northern Iowa, like Spencer and Algona, where I grew up, and others, they have their own broadband up there. Why can smaller communities build broadband, and slightly larger communities like Fort Dodge can't seem to get the job done?
Well, I think they will. Cedar Falls is a bit bigger. We've seen
it is.
Some cities that are at least, some cities of more than 100,000 people. Longmont is actually about 80 to 100,000 people. It really comes down to trust people have in elected officials. I think in smaller towns, when you have a Mediacom rep coming in there and saying things that are not true, people know that they're not true. They trust the mayor. They trust the city council. As you get to cities that are larger and larger, people don't have that same trust about the elected officials. And so it takes more work to convince people that the business model is right. But here's the thing, whether it's you and me, whether it's the city of Fort Dodge, what will happen is you start building competition to a big cable company. One of the first things they're going to do, they're going to lower the rates. They're going to try and lock people into 2-year contracts. And that's the point at which you see whether or not a network will succeed. Because if in temporarily lowering their rates, they can prevent that new network from getting enough customers to cash flow, that's how they really kill the competition. And if they do that in Fort Dodge, then you've got a bunch of other places that are looking at it and they're thinking, I'm not happy with where I am, but I just don't want to deal with this mess. So it's really important that people understand not to take these discounts that'll start rolling out just as competition is coming to town.
Yeah, I'm ready for that to happen. I'm ready for competition. My God, do you think there's any competition for advertising dollars in the year 2021 in old media like radio? Yes, there is. I mean, competition is what makes our world go around. I don't have any problem competing. It's the lack of competitiveness that has gotten us where we are. You explained a couple of tactics used by Mediacom and others at our last city council election. Lo and behold, when we started talking about the level of service Mediacom provides, who comes forward to run for city council? Well, a Mediacom employee. What a surprise! And that person was not elected, but immediately started a change.org petition to have me removed from the air because I was picking on him because of his mental illness or something. I don't really know. It didn't go very far. It didn't go very far. But that's the sort of thing. It's just unbelievable. I mean, it's like they'll stop at nothing.
It's true. The tactics that they will use can get quite dirty. They vary a lot, but we've seen things that just still leave us stunned.
Yeah. We're talking, by the way, with Christopher Mitchell. He's with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. What does that name of your organization mean? I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but I think it needs to be fleshed out a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. We contrast it with self sufficiency, which is to say, like, we don't think that y'all should be like growing weeds and turning it into fabrics and that sort of a thing. It's more about the things that can be done locally. They should be done locally, and in particular, political decisions should be done more locally than they are. So we want to make sure both that cities aren't stuck dealing with big corporations like Mediacom that can really harm local businesses. We also oppose too much decision making being in DC or even in the state capitals. Mm-hmm. We want to see decisions pushed down. It doesn't mean we think everything can be solved at the local level, but it's kind of like there's a lot more that we can solve at the local level. Let's push down that, and let's also push down the responsibility, because it's like you were saying earlier. There's a lot of people who don't want to take responsibility, and we want to make sure that people have responsibility to make decisions where people feel the consequences.
So you just don't deal with broadband then?
No, we deal with a lot of things. I deal with broadband, but we have other programs that work on the economy more significantly. I heard on the advertisement, are a doctor. We work on pharmacy issues. We work in
truth. Yes, the doctor of truth. Yes.
Yes, we work in electricity, and we work in solid waste and composting issues. A lot of the things that every town has to deal with one way or another.
All right, Chris Mitchell is our guest, we continue to struggle here in Fort Dodge with broadband and things that I guess we've gotten too comfortable with. Just frankly too comfortable with, and when we get comfortable with it, we expect it, and we become more easily manipulated, I guess, and pushed around in a lot of cases. And that's why I contacted Mr. Mitchell. And again, I thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for being on the air with us. This is important to note that, really a large national company is just shoving us around and taking as much money from us as we can. And we need to ally ourselves with people like Mr. Mitchell, who can help us a little bit in pushing back on this nonsense, because it's anti-competitive, it's anti-free market, it's any number of bad things. But Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to leave the last couple of minutes to you. Do you have a closing thought?
Yeah, one thing I would say is that when you hear elected officials, often at the state level, but as well in DC, talking about how they're going to fix broadband problems, you need to understand that often they are not talking about Fort Dodge. They are talking about the more rural areas, and where they're talking about putting billions of dollars into this, there is a sense in the state capitol and frankly, in all the state capitals, as well as in DC, that places like Fort Dodge are solved, that we don't have to worry about it from a government perspective. And I think we really need to demand that government creates more competition. We need to make sure that it continues to remove barriers to investment. But frankly, for 25 years now, the government has focused on removing barriers to a limited extent. The big cable and telephone companies have really driven the boat in this case. But we need to put more pressure on elected officials to understand that in places like Fort Dodge, we can do better and we need to do better. Some cities do not have the authority to build their own networks. Now in Iowa, you do, fortunately, so it's not as much of an issue. But I just want people to understand that when they hear people talking about broadband, you should be asking them, hey, I'm stuck with a cable monopoly. Are you talking about me, or are you talking about the person that has nothing?
Good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. Good point. I hope you'll be on the air with us again sometime in the future, sir.
Yes, I would enjoy that.
All right. Thank you very much. We've been talking with Christopher Mitchell of the Institute for Self-Reliance. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right. This is AM 1400 KVFD, the voice of Fort Dodge.
There's never any FOMO with the iHeartRadio app. You won't ever have to miss out on your favorite shows and contests.